Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Lindsay Coates. I'm acting President and CEO of Interaction, which is an alliance of civil society organizations that work all over the world to address issues of human dignity and poverty. I'm very excited to be here for the launch of this citizen engagement massive online course, a MOOC. I personally signed up for the MOOC last night and encouraged my daughter, who does community organizing in Louisiana and Mississippi, to engage citizens with their processes around regulating the oil and gas industry, to sign up for the course as well. I hope that represents the kind of range of individuals which I think the MOOC really wants to attract as a global public good. Someone like me, who has been sort of working in this space for more time than I want to tell you, and someone like my daughter, who's in her 20s, who is just starting out with this kind of very important work, which is significant for every country and every sector, which is part of what makes it so exciting to me. Let me explain our run of show briefly. We will have some opening remarks in a few minutes from the president of the bank, Dr. Jim Kim, and then a welcome message from Sanjay Pradham and Mario Marcel, who have sort of co-led a lot of this work and a lot of this process. We will then have a panel discussion with a wonderful group of experts who will be talking with us about this kind of work and why it's so important from various sectors that they sit in for this work. We'll talk amongst ourselves for about 25 minutes. Then we will solicit questions. In addition to this august audience in the Preston Auditorium, we also have presence on World Bank Live and through Coursera. If you are in the room, we ask that you write your questions on the wonderful little cards. Who are the question collectors? There are question collectors, and they will take your questions. We'll also be running through the questions online. We will try to avoid repetition, so don't be wounded if you don't hear your specific wording of your question. It just means that we had another question on a similar topic. I'd now like to briefly cue up a video that we have introducing the course, and then we will call on the president of the World Bank for his welcoming remarks.
Recent events have shown us that the relationship between government and its citizens is often broken. From the Arab Spring to Occupy Wall Street, citizens worldwide are mobilizing, calling for greater openness, accountability, and responsiveness from their governments. In many developing countries, people are seeking a deeper engagement in public life than simply casting a vote every few years. They want to be included in the decisions that affect their lives. At the same time, many governments have learned that societies work best when government and citizens work together. When citizens are invited to participate in policy discussions and public service delivery, they bring a wealth of ideas, perspectives, and know-how that enhance public programs. Though a concept as old as society itself, the notion that citizen engagement lies at the heart of development has gained tremendous momentum in recent years. Is this a game changer for development?
One of the lessons we've learned from the failures of development is that just pumping money into the system is not going to solve the issue. We need to look at governance problems. We have to look at institutional issues. We need to look at how we make institutions more responsive to people. Governments that listen to their citizens deliver better services, and they formulate better policies.
I think the first thing we have to do is convince policymakers and political leaders that we're dealing with something that's unstoppable here. You know, the move to greater openness, to transparency, to good governance cannot be stopped. You can't run closed governments anymore. You can't hide away from public accountability.
Enabling citizens to influence the design, implementation and monitoring of public policies can result in improved accountability of governments, leading to better development outcomes for all.
In this new approach of governance, people actually have a say in determining what the programs will be. They're not passive recipients, but they're active actors for development, and citizen engagement is central in this process.
In addition to providing a rich learning experience, this course hopes to catalyze new citizen engagement initiatives around the world. Our instructors, leaders in academia, government, and civil society, provide a broad range of perspectives and real-world evidence to give students a deeper understanding of citizen engagement. Together, we ask and answer the question, is citizen engagement a game changer for development?
We're looking at a wide range of innovations in this course, many of which have been brought about by the ICT revolution. We're looking at things like crisis mapping, the crowdsourcing of constitutions, and we're looking at whether those are really working or not.
I think key aspect of the course is that it will be very interactive, allowing for people to contribute their own experiences, ideas, and learn from best practices and good cases from around the world, and it's very concrete.
We're really excited about this course, and we think you will be too.
Well, that's very inspiring. I'd like to invite Jim Kim to share some opening remarks with us about how this important work fits in with the broader agenda for the bank, and how, in a way, this is really not a bank-centric thing. This is about changing the broader world. Please, Dr. Kim, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much. I've got just some remarks I'd like to get through and then give you some of my own perspectives. This is very exciting. You know, I was in the university when the phenomenon of massive open online courses first hit. And when we first heard about the Stanford course that had 145,000 people from around the world on it, we really thought that this was something unique and that we would have to embrace. At the World Bank Group, we're doing this because especially on this particular subject, because we think that informing everyone about the importance of citizen engagement is critical to achieving the goal of ending extreme poverty by 2030 and boosting shared prosperity. Citizen engagement helps achieve these objectives because it opens up the process of delivering public services and makes both governments and ourselves, and by ourselves we mean here at the World Bank Group, more accountable for the work we do. This can lead to improved delivery, quality, and timeliness of public services, and the better management of public finances. It also produces greater social inclusion by incorporating the perspectives of traditionally marginalized groups into the public policy process. Feedback from citizens has improved the availability of medicines, for example, in health centers in Tanzania, and the delivery of textbooks in government-run schools in the Philippines. It's no surprise, then, that we're seeing citizens demand greater say in decision-making and in the way public services are governed. Indeed, it's wonderful that many governments are becoming more inclusive and eager to respond to citizens' needs, but as we also know, it's also in other circumstances in other countries, the space for citizens to engage is shrinking. Now, this has been important for our work for some time, and in 2014, we took a real hard look at the percentage of our projects that were incorporating beneficiary feedback, and the net number in 2014 was 35%. And then we set a goal of having 100% of our projects informed by beneficiary feedback by 2018, and we think it's made a difference because in our last close look, that in just a period of a little over a year, the percentage of new projects approved last year by the board, there was 60% of those projects had beneficiary feedback, which we're very, very proud of, that we've made such a big jump in a pretty short time. This is the third massive open online course that we've done to date, and it's taught by global experts in a free, open, and collaborative format. And we think it'll provide a way for a very broad cross-section of citizens, civil society, government officials, and development agencies to learn what citizen engagement is and how to apply it. We hope that it will empower thousands of people, including youth around the world, to become part of the movement to end poverty. We're using this to leverage new technologies to help demonstrate global access to knowledge and learning. And as part of this, we're going to soon launch our Open Learning Campus, which is a state-of-the-art learning platform that will increase our engagement with policymakers, practitioners, and citizens worldwide. And finally, I'd like to thank our partners, the London School of Economics, the Overseas Development Institute, Participedia, and Civicus for their co-leadership in making this course possible. And thank you also to the MOOC participants for taking the time to learn about citizen engagement. So this is really, really critical. And some of the comments on the video were really, I think, important to remember. This is not something that's going to go backwards. We have now, over the past 2.5 years, tried very hard to adopt a new attitude and a new approach. Some of you know about the various issues that have come up over the last 1.5 years, Kenya, Ethiopia resettlements. And the promise that we're making is that when we know that something has gone wrong in any of our projects, we're going to look at it carefully, and when we've done something that goes against our rules and regulations, we'll admit it, and then we'll try to fix it. And there's no way that we can do this effectively without very, very engaged citizens. So this is something that we're very committed to. We also know that this is not something that every government, every civil society organization can just take up and know how to make happen. We know that there have been some very good experiences with citizen engagement. We think there have been some less successful experiences with citizen engagement. And in other words, we don't want to just make this a declaration or something that a box that we check off. We want to tackle the issues around citizen engagement as if we were building a bridge or building a road or building a healthcare system. There are good ways to do it, there are bad ways to do it, and we have to know that when we commit to citizen feedback, that it's actually happening in a way that gets at the core problems in any project, and then we commit to taking that feedback and changing the way we do things in order to make the projects more effective for the poorest, which is our greatest concern. So I hope that we have many, many, many tens and maybe even hundreds of thousands of people on the course. And I invite everyone to take the course and to follow along, at least partly because I want you to know how serious we are about this particular issue. And we also look forward to getting your feedback, the participants in the course, as to how we can do things better and how the entire global community can do things better. So thanks for being here. Thanks for the organizers for putting it together. And I'll be following along carefully.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd now like Sanjay Pradham, who's our VP for knowledge, change, learning, a very, very august title, and Mario Martel, who is also leading the governance practice in this area, to offer some welcoming remarks before we turn to the panel.
Thank you, Lindsay. Really wonderful to see all of you and to welcome all of you who are online. I want to welcome all of you to this course. I'm very excited about this course. I'm very excited about this course for two purposes. One is that, in my view, this really represents a frontier area of development and of governance, citizen engagement, and I'll just refer briefly to that. And the second reason is that doing it as a MOOC, as a massive open online course, holds the promise of multiplying the transformational impact of citizen engagement. And so when you combine the two, this is quite a dynamo of a course. And so I'm very glad you're here and you're going to be taking the course. So just first a word on citizen engagement and how it really represents, in my view, and Mario will say further about this, I'm sure, a frontier area of development and of governance. In my own thinking, there have been three stages of evolution of the inexorable march, as the Civicus leader said on the video, of the governance work. The first phase was the traditional approach of governance and of development, where we engaged with the supply side of governance. We engaged with governments. We directly provided financing and support to governments, and they delivered programs. And we know that while some governments succeeded, many others didn't, and there were limitations to a purely supply-side approach. And a central problem of development and governance has always been a problem of accountability. How do we ensure that the resources and the support that we provide reach the poorest, the citizens and the poorest who are most who we intend to benefit from these resources? That led to, if you will, and I'm just simplifying it, a second stage in the evolution, which was complementing the supply side with a demand side approach. So we started working on the non-state actors, on institutions of state institutions, but also civil society organizations. And this course represents a further evolution in that second stage, where there's an opportunity to directly engage with citizens. Citizens can directly provide their input into policy making and service delivery. And this is aided hugely by information technology. And the fact that we have more than 6 billion people today who have mobile phones, and one of my colleagues, the Vice President for Africa, used to say that the mobile phone today is the most powerful asset of the poor in Africa. Mm-hmm. And when they have these assets and they can express their voices and we can galvanize those voices, that represents a very exciting frontier. And so you see innovations that you'll see in this course, from checkmyschool.org in the Philippines, or to the Governor Asks in Brazil, or to Map Kibera in Nairobi, which allows citizens and those voiceless poor who don't have any voice, giving them a collective voice which far transcends their individual voice. And that represents the real opportunity. And that leads me to the third and final frontier that this represents. You will see that a lot of these innovations are not just civil society innovations, which are very important. They're also governments that have sought to reach out or listen to the voices of the citizens and respond to those voices. And this represents, in my view, a really exciting frontier, which is collaborative governance, where the demand side meets the supply side, and there's actually responsiveness to that. And this course represents that, because you'll have participants from government, civil society, private sector, and so on. So in this sense, I think this really represents a frontier, and I'm very excited for those of you who will be partaking this course. And then, the other part of the excitement is to do it as a massive open online course. Mm-hmm. And that's so exciting, because you can have thousands and thousands of people who have access to this information. All of these innovations I talked about, there's so many that are mushrooming around the world that we don't even know about. So it's not only an opportunity through a MOOC to share these innovations, but to actually invite innovations to be shared by those we don't know, and to create a space for sharing of lessons. And so that's why the MOOC represents a very, very important opportunity for us to do this. I think as of today, even for this course, we have had already 13,000 applicants, people who have enrolled from 182 countries. 45% of them are women, and that's really, really great to see. This will be part of our Open Learning Campus, which is a single destination for learning that we are creating. And President Kim has already thanked our partners, Participedia, LSE, ODI, and Civicus. I also want to thank the government of Korea. They provided funding for our course, and I'm very grateful for that. So thank you very much. Really enjoy it. And with this, back to you, Lindsay.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Mario Marcel, would you talk to us a bit about the work of your group and how this relates to this opportunity, both for the bank and for the broader development community?
Sure. Thank you, Lindsay. Well, excitement seems to be the word of the day. And for us who work on governance issues, I think it's especially exciting because this has to do with the essence of what governance is. And I would like to summarize our views on this on perhaps 4 or 5 statements. I mean, first of all, this one, that citizens are central to governance. This may look pretty straightforward. Mm-hmm. But when we look at what countries or international organizations or scholars have been doing in relation to governance, you see a lot of the disciplines, the specialities, the systems in governments, but very much inward looking. not so much looking at the intersection, at the interaction with citizens. But if you ask any civil servant what they're there for, probably they will say that they are there to serve citizens. But how that translates into concrete agendas, in the way that you organize work, in the way that you channel reforms, makes a real difference. Second issue, citizen engagement as a way of reflecting this role of citizens in governance. First of all, doesn't need to be complicated. Many people in different parts of the world, sometimes wonder, okay, but if we engage citizens, this will slow down this program, or will be more difficult to implement a certain reform. There are many examples of how engaging citizens on a timely basis can save you a lot of trouble, avoid a lot of mistakes, and speed up things quite substantially. Thirdly, citizen engagement is not putting citizens against civil servants. Many civil servants, many policymakers, many authorities find in the engagement with citizens a way out from the complex political economy of public policies, where heavy and powerful interests try to influence public policy, and where public servants are trying to deliver for the general public and for the common good. If you're able to engage with citizens, that part of the job is half done already. Fourthly, engaging citizens pays off, not only in terms of what we just discussed, but also in building trust in institutions. Trust in institutions is the biggest asset that the country may have. When you do not have trust, then people probably behave in ways that are very different from what expected from them in implementing public policies. Informality may become pretty generalized. So when trust is missing, everything is considerably more difficult, more costly, more complex. So if citizen engagement can contribute to increase trust in institutions, I think that you will see a very substantial payoff, and more systemic than just what happens in a certain reform or a certain project. Finally, citizen engagement is something that is happening today. It's not something that is in the theory or in the agendas of somebody, but actually is something that is happening everywhere. And in this course, we will see a lot of examples, but above all, we will see a lot of examples coming from participants in this course. And I think that that will help us to connect the dots, to go beyond belief, beyond faith, beyond theory, towards something that is concrete, that is substantial, and that actually is making a difference in many places. The international community is recognizing this in many ways. We have the Open Government Partnership. We have a lot of discussion on these issues as part of the SDG process. So this is something that is not coming from, from another planet, from another agenda, from a certain elite. It's something that is happening, that is concrete, and we will see a lot of that in this course. So this is what this MOOC is about. It's about seeing how all these different dimensions of citizen engagement can really work, and to connect these dots to make a real difference for development.
Thank you so much, Mario. Thank you so much for orienting our conversation. I'd now like the panelists to join me at the front of the room. Terrific remarks. Great thought about trust. That's no small level of ambition. for this kind of work, and no small level of ambition to describe, Sanjay, a historical evolution of the nature of governance. So let's talk to some folks who I hope will ground us in a more concrete way, and also I think in the spirit of an academic course, be willing to challenge any received wisdom around this topic. I'm going to briefly introduce, we have Danny Saskrajan. Where is Danny? He's supposed to be on the screen. Hello, Danny, how are you?
Hi, Lindsay. Nice to see you.
So Danny is the Secretary General of Civicus. He is coming to us from Johannesburg. Hopefully there will not be a rolling power outage. He warned me that that might happen, so hopefully he will be with us. And then immediately, well, I guess we'll start in this direction. Jeff Thwinda is the Practice Manager for Global Governance. He's been with the bank for 20-some years in a variety, I know he looks surprised, in a variety of capacities, but started his life, I feel kinship with him because he started his life as a public service lawyer in Malawi, but has worked in development and has sort of seen it from all angles. Next to Danny, we have Tina Nabachi, who I just met today, who is an associate professor of public administration and international affairs at the Maxwell School, which at Syracuse University, which does some terrific work in citizen engagement and building democracy. She is expert on exploring citizen accountability issues and has written many articles that have received many awards, so she must be extremely smart. And then immediately to my left is Santu Santala, who is the executive director for the World Bank Group for Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, and Sweden, which is a lot of countries to be responsible for. So that right there is a big job, and she has been a leader on the government side in this space. So I think we're going to have a very, very interesting discussion. I'm going to ask each of the panelists sort of one question that allows them to talk about their area of expertise, then a question for the group, and then we're interested in what we can hear from you both online and in the room. So I'm going to start with Jeff. In the context of the World Bank, what does citizen engagement mean as someone who's sort of in the trenches trying to implement this change for the bank?
Thank you. Is this on?
I don't know. Is it on?
It's on now. It's on. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Lindsay. First of all, I'm glad that we are meeting to launch this MOOC. It's important because it helps us to focus on what the previous speakers have said is an important topic and why. For the World Bank, this MOOC is extremely important, and I especially like the approach that we've taken to it, which is a collaborative approach that's brought on board the 4 partners that have been mentioned previously: ODI, LSE, Civicus, and Participedia. This is important because when you ask in the context of the World Bank, what does citizen engagement really mean? It's important to underscore that the World Bank, unlike Webster's dictionary and the Oxford Dictionary, is not here to define terms. So you won't get a dictionary-type definition of citizen engagement from the World Bank. What it is you will get into the strategic framework that the World Bank has introduced for citizen engagement, and there it tells us how we think about citizen engagement. That's not a definition. It is how citizen engagement translates for us, how we can make it meaningful and appropriate to our institution. It comes within the constraints of our institution. So, in fact, I think I jotted down this morning, when you go in to look at how the World Bank thinks about citizen engagement, what are you going to read? It says something like it's a two-way interaction between governments and citizens and even private sector. And that two-way interaction is within the scope of World Bank Group interventions, which include policy dialogue, programs, projects, knowledge products, and advisory services, and so on. That kind of interaction gives a stake in citizens in the outcomes of what we do. So it has a specific objective which is linked to development outcomes, intermediate and final. So that's what you see when you take a look at how we think about citizen engagement. However, it may sound a little limited when we talk about within the scope of the World Bank. But it's quite broad because we think of citizen engagement as a way to bring the voices of citizens, as Mario has mentioned, into the public policy sphere to help formulate policies. Citizens are engaged in the formulation of budgets, in monitoring public spending. Citizens are involved in the monitoring of public procurement and basic services. It's broad. But we shouldn't think of citizen engagement in that kind of bounded way, because it's as I was chatting with colleagues this morning, it's a larger concept than the World Bank. It is beyond us. That's why, I repeat, it was significant that we drew in external partners so that it helps us to be less parochial and open-minded in our understanding of social accountability. The concept itself includes political and democratic participation of citizens as a matter of rights. And some of that participation, political and democratic, may actually be outside the scope of, or the mandates of our institutions. So it's very important for me to underscore that point, that thinking about definitions, we have a narrative that we have created for ourselves that enables us to see citizen engagement and how it can improve what we do. It has become central to our business model. But we also recognize that as a concept, it is beyond us and encompasses much broader notions. When we go out and support citizen engagement, whether it's in the project in Brazil that's just mentioned, the governor asks, a massive outreach to citizens to tap into their insights into public policy, health public policy, which translated into tangible infrastructure programming. Or in South Kivu, where we used ICTs to elicit feedback from local citizens. That feedback translated into actual targeting of projects in response to their preference, and it improved the quality of services. As a result, citizens were willing to pay more taxes in South Kivu. So yes, it works. Even within what you might think of as a more bounded understanding of it, it works. So let me not take too much of your time. We want to recognize once again how critical this is to us and how we think about improving the work that we do from public policy to the delivery of services and community benefits.
Thanks so much.
Let me also say that
Sorry.
within that broad citizen engagement framework that we have the subset of beneficiary feedback. And you heard about the target that has been set of beneficiary feedback in 100% of projects. I want to talk about that later, maybe when you come to the second round. But to underscore again that that is only a subset. We should not conflate beneficiary feedback with citizen engagement. Beneficiary feedback is one of the subsets of what we're trying to do.
I would agree with that statement, Jeff. Thank you so much. I want to now turn to Satu and then Danny. Satu, you get a hard question, but you got a heads up on this hard question. So why should governments engage citizens? And more importantly, is this possible in every country?
Thank you. I think the first part of the question is not so difficult.
Right.
I think it's actually almost self-evident, and people here this morning have mentioned several of the reasons. You know, the governments I represent, the Nordic and Baltic countries, really see engaging people as a key element of good development and sustainable development. So there are clearly many reasons why governments will want to do it. First of all, it's the right thing to do. Most governments actually have the aspiration to provide for their people the rights and liberties that they should be having. So this is something that many governments would want to be doing, therefore. Secondly, it's in the government's own interest to engage people because they will get better value for money in terms of getting better results for both their policies and the projects they undertake. But also because they will be able to have better control over the chain of accountabilities within their own systems. For example, getting feedback of, are the teachers actually showing up for jobs, for their work while we're paying their salaries, or are the medicines being delivered, and so on. So they have better feedback themselves. And then also, I think Marcelo has spoken about the trust factor already. Really building a good social contract can be a very, very powerful tool in building a sustainable society. And there, if a government is able to be more open to inputs from citizens and people, more responsive, that does help building that kind of a trust, which in turn makes people more willing to contribute in terms of taxes or otherwise. And it makes people more feel more responsible for the outcomes. And again, over time, leads to better resources for public program and better results. So it's kind of a virtuous cycle of trust and accountability that really can help a society thrive. And that's certainly been the experience in our part of the world of development over time. But in all countries, my view is yes, it can be done in all countries. However, you will always have to take the context into consideration. So your approach will be adapted to where you're working, and I guess your ambitions initially will also have to be tuned to where you're working. In very limited or environments where the space for citizens' engagement is really limited, even small steps can matter a lot. And I think there, for example, the World Bank engaging with citizens quite openly and getting feedback for the projects can be a very good start for something like that. And I'm very encouraged by the work that is being done in the bank in that way. But of course, you'll also have to take into consideration concerns of security and safety in very limited environments. So you wouldn't be doing, you wouldn't be just without respect for the environment, you wouldn't just be doing any kind of tools, but you would be adapting to it. But I must say that I'm very happy and proud that the World Bank is launching this course today, because I think this is really an important tool, and I hope that a lot of people will enjoy the course.
Thank you so much, Satu, and thank you for your leadership in this area. Danny, I have the strange sensation of both having you behind me and having you in front of me, but I'm just going to act like you're in front of me. So you lead Civicus, and obviously, you know, citizen engagement is your bread and butter. Why is it important for civil society and citizens, and what really needs to be done so that citizens and civil society can be full participants? in these
Okay,
kinds
hi,
of
Lindsay.
processes?
Well, it feels a bit strange to see me looking so large in the room over there. I'm sorry, I'm not really that big in real life. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I'm delighted to be working with our other partners on this MOOC. As you've said, Lindsay, citizen engagement is at the very heart of what we at Civicus are all about. I mean, we're like Interaction, a global platform for civil society, big organizations, but also small grassroots activists. And for all of us, this sort of welcome interest in citizen engagement from institutions like the World Bank is an opportunity, I suppose, to go back to the fundamentals about what we mean by development. I mean, I think for decades now, we've adopted a very technocratic bean counter-ish way of delivering development, talking about services, talking about saving lives or delivering education or whatever else it is, and forgotten that at the heart of the development project lies the empowerment of people, about voice and political choice. And so to us, this new interest in citizen engagement is about putting citizens back at the heart of development and making sure that all of our development actors, including non-governmental organizations, take citizens seriously. They involve citizens in decision-making, they listen to citizens, they gather feedback from citizens. So in a funny way, I think I would say that, ask not what citizen engagement will do for citizens, but more importantly perhaps, or more pertinently perhaps, ask what citizen engagement can do for institutions like the World Bank, that, as Jim Kim has reminded us, that, this notion could revolutionize the very way in which development policy and practice works, and let's hope the World Bank experiment succeeds. I wanted to add a word of caution here, which I think Satu has talked a little bit about already, which is that the principles of citizen engagement are clear enough. The technological tools that will allow citizen engagement are there for the taking. But unfortunately, in many, many countries around the world, civic space is shrinking, not getting better. The ability of citizens to organize, to mobilize, to have their voice heard is actually being threatened in many, many parts of the world. And that's because of regressive governments that want to clamp down on freedom of expression or freedom of association. It could be because of internet surveillance. It could be because of clear threats to civil society voices that want to dissent from the prevailing view. So I think we need to have a clear vision here that we need to talk about citizen engagement and what more development institutions can do to engage with citizens, but at the same time protect civic space so that the basic conditions for citizen engagement are there all over the world, and everyone has that ability to engage.
Thank you so much, Danny. I think you're echoing a lot of concerns that we hear at Interaction from our membership about how important this is. Now, Tina, you'll be our last on the panel. Talk with us about the role of new technologies in citizen engagement. I mean, Danny's remarks also bring up for me the idea that those technologies also can be a way for government to shrink space. And so we tend to talk about the access to the mobile phone as if it was the most amazing thing that ever happened. It is amazing, but with that, there come other challenges that sort of at the other end.
Sure, absolutely. I think just as citizen engagement can be a game changer for development, so too are the new technologies a game changer for participation. They've really enabled us to overcome many of the challenges associated historically with citizen participation in terms of size and scale. How do you get large numbers, demographically representative groups of people to come give input on public policy? And the technologies have changed that, allowing people to have voice and choice across a number of different policy issues. So things from crowdsourcing and crowdfunding to serious games to online or e-petitions, tools and apps for the development of teams and tasks. These have really changed the way that citizens can have voice on policy issues. There are now a number of tools out there to inform the public about issues that are going on, to give them space to discuss and connect on issues, to gather their feedback and their input, to help citizens make decisions or give input onto decision making, and to encourage communities and individuals to take on public work to solve problems. That said, there are some real challenges to this, not only in terms of using governments using these technologies to limit the space for citizens to engage, but also in terms of access. Many people now have mobile phones or smartphones, but the digital divide there still exists in terms of how people use these and how well they can use these new technologies. So I think there's some work to be done there. Nevertheless, I think that these technologies have really enabled us to scale up participation, to think about how we can recruit large numbers of people to come participate. And the use of these technologies, not just remotely where people are coming in with a click or liking a post or tweeting something forward, but using these technologies also in face-to-face meetings, I think is a really exciting area for innovation and development.
Thanks so much, Tina. I want to kind of adhere pretty much to the schedule, but I also want to sort of do a lightning round with the group. So the question for this is this a game changer for development? And I think everybody has said that it could be. So I would love for each of you to say, what's the biggest risk or thing to be aware of, as sort of as succinctly as you can? And I think Danny's talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to maybe start in reverse order and go Tina, Danny, Satu, and Jeff. Sort of quickly say, what is the sort of the risk or the negative thing or the thing the bad thing that could happen that'll stop all this?
I think there are two real challenges that governments, civic leaders, others who are using participation need to be aware of. One is the issue of recruitment and who's participating. So just because people are coming online or coming to meetings doesn't mean that they're necessarily representative of the broader society out there.
Yes.
And that really needs to be a focus of how we design participatory processes and how we think about participant selection and participant recruitment. The second challenge, I would say, is thinking about how we're actually going to use public input. We could have engagement process after engagement process, but if citizens are coming and their input is not actually shaping decisions or policies or whatever the outcome or goal of the participatory process is, that can actually undermine their trust, undermine their sense of efficacy and their belief that government will be responsive to their concerns.
Those are great points, Tina. Danny, what do you think are sort of the big risks or problems? What could sort of go wrong?
Let me develop Tina's first risk there around co-option, I suppose. That, whenever there's a new sort of flavor or catchphrase of the month, I do worry that policymakers will just simply co-opt these measures. And, you're sitting there in the World Bank, and I think the world will be watching the World Bank to see whether Jim Kim's promise around beneficiary feedback is delivered, because what we don't need more of are warm words from bank presidents about what they're going to do. If, however, beneficiary feedback can change the way meaningfully the bank does its work, then wonderful. But on the national level, we should also worry. I mean, I'm reminded of an example of Paul Kagame, President Kagame, apparently being championed as a citizen engager because he responds to tweets directly, which is wonderful because he is listening in that way. Unfortunately, though, all of the evidence suggests that civic space in Rwanda is horrible, that those people who want to associate or organize cannot do it in systematic ways. So this is an example, I'd say, of someone co-opting the technology to be able to say, look, I do really care about citizen voice, while repressing civil society and civic space in their country.
That's a great sort of Orwellian problem that you've identified that I'm sympathetic to. So Satu, will you tell us sort of what you think is the big risk or the big challenge here?
I think it's, again, I guess the same 2 points, but from maybe a slightly different point of view. I see that doing this as a ticking a box exercise, sort of very superficially, is possible. But that would be really, really bad, because then people will not be willing to engage another time if they see that this was just, this led nowhere. And it really requires much more depth in analyzing how are we going to do it and how are we going to use the feedback we get. Secondly, also on Tina's point about who participates, I think there's a risk of not looking at inclusiveness. For example, the groups or people that are easily marginalized, are we sure that we capture their views? And especially if we use a large number of respondents, how do we know that we're also capturing a different view that may come from a specific group within? So I think those would be the challenges.
Thank you so much. Jeff, you get sort of the final word
Yes.
as the person who's trying to work within the bank that's actively trying to co-opt all civil society.
Thank you. Well, as an institution, we're very good at risk management. We are good at identifying risks and providing remedies to manage those risks. So, and there's a lot of thinking that has gone into citizen engagement and the risks. I would say all of the above. What has been mentioned by all of you is relevant. A very important risk for us is this whole idea of putting your money where your mouth is, which leads to a huge gap between rhetoric and reality. And so we have very high rhetoric when it comes to the importance of engaging citizens for development. When it comes to mobilizing the resources for doing so, there are plenty of challenges. And those challenges come from understandable sources. We are principally an institution that lends to governments. And it's difficult for governments to borrow in order for citizens to monitor them and to call them to account. It will always be a tension, which has led us to alternative sources of financing for this type of work. If it wasn't for trust funds, I don't know where citizen engagement and social accountability would be in this institution. In many ways, there is also a flip side to that, which is it's good that we have trust funds that can help to seed these efforts and demonstrate the value of those initiatives, as long as we think much more boldly about how we can provide real, meaningful, long-term financing that helps to sustain citizen feedback at the level of operations.
Yeah.
What we have in the GPSA, for example, that's led by Robbie, is a very good example of the bank trying to put its money where its mouth is. And I think we need to see a demonstration of more of that. A challenge for operations because the sources of funds are few and far between.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to now go to questions from the Coursera site and World Bank Live. I have many more than I can get to. So I think that there are lots of interesting things that we can go with. And I'll ask everybody to sort of be brief in their responses. This is an interesting online question from the Coursera site from someone named Tadranka Foster. Citizen engagement is complex and success is not guaranteed. That's true. Yet donors, they feel they must always demonstrate success. How can we support donors in experimentation and recognize the risk of failure as useful in development? Very hard to talk about failure in development. I know big NGOs don't like to talk about failure. So how do we create the space for saying, oh, we messed up, let's do it a different way because of what we learned from citizens? Ideas on this? Who wants to start?
I could do that. This is something that I think all donor agencies struggle with. Because at the same time, we need to be continuously getting the support of our own taxpayers or our own basis. And they don't, of course, want to hear that we wasted their money. So maybe one of the things to do is to go, because now modern technology allows us to be more real time in seeking feedback. So if you don't wait all the way until the end and realize, oops, we failed, but to be able to sort of much more get feedback while we're implementing and be able to make changes and be flexible enough in your design, I think that could really help that so that the end results would then, so you could say, okay, initially we failed or initially we weren't that good, but over time we improved and then, at the end of the project we did much better.
Tina, do you have thoughts on this? And then I'll turn to Danny and Jeff.
I think that's a really great point. I think building evaluation into citizen engagement projects is really critical, and we often don't do that. So we need to have some feedback mechanisms to look at issues of participant satisfaction, who's in the room, how responsive people feel government is being. And if we can build those in as our processes go on, I think we're more likely to adapt and have better outcomes.
Danny, do you have thoughts on this failure question?
Yeah, I think that the key is to understand whether we're interested in citizen engagement as a means or as an end or both. If we see it as a means to better service delivery or better outcomes or whatever else it is, then perhaps building in those metrics becomes slightly easier, although the sort of counterfactual challenge here is perhaps as great as in any other area of measurement. But I suppose the point I'd make is that there is a good in itself when it comes to citizen engagement, because of that point coming back to sort of voice and empowerment being at the heart of the development project. So, you know, I agree that we have to keep measuring and keep convincing people to invest in these areas, but I would also argue that there is a principle here that we have to stick by, which is around empowerment.
Okay, so maybe it's not a failure. What we thought was a failure is maybe not a failure. Jeff?
Yeah, I agree with everything that has been said about measurement and the importance of that. I would say that one of the real important features of citizen engagement is related to the question of ownership. That when we engage citizens and we do it right, they own the development process. When they own the development process, there's a sense in which they share the risk of failure. Sometimes we bear so much of the burden of risk and the failure of operations because we own the project. And there's a sense in which if we do it right across the board with government, with the citizens and us, we know we're taking risks, and when things go wrong, there is a shared ownership of that risk, which means the approach that we take to design, to implementation, to monitoring and evaluation is extremely important, has to be participatory, harnessing as much of the citizen input as we can as a way to manage risk.
Yeah, that's really important. So this is a very interesting question, again, from the Coursera Online. What advice can you give on a way forward in developing countries where civil society has been discredited and is seen as not accountable and transparent, and therefore not different in behavior from government? That's a great question because you know, I think that goes to the co-option issue. Danny, would you like to maybe start with that? What advice would you give on a way forward in developing countries where civil society has been discredited and seen as not accountable and transparent?
Sure, I think it's a great question. It's a great point that lies behind it, that I suppose the symptom of having large professionalized civil society organization, the development NGOs, for example, is that they too have become, in many cases, isolated from the communities they claim to serve, from the people who they want to help. And so accountability for those institutions also, I think, relies, just as much as it does for the bank, on their ability to connect with people, to have meaningful interactions with people, so that they're not seen as isolated foreigners who turn up and, you know, with their shipments of relief goods, but instead are seen as integrated development actors. And so I think a good starting point is very much around accountability for all development actors, including, of course, civil society organizations.
Other thoughts on this question of you know, civil society that has been maybe totally co-opted? Danny gives the example of you know, NGOs coming from the outside, but what about situations where there's not a lot of independence for civil society groups, but they exist?
I think we can show example after example of citizens themselves coming to organize from the grassroots, really from bottom up. And whether that's happening in small community study circles and discussion circles or hyper-local online networks, I think there are ways to engage citizens that don't rely on civil society organizations, and that there are a lot of really innovative and entrepreneurial individuals out there who can make that happen.
So technology is a way around or a way into that problem.
Technology, sure, and also, I mean, let's get back to the roots of face-to-face community organizing. You know, technology is great and it is an asset, but it's not the only way to think about citizen engagement.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, or shall I move to the next question?
I'm happy to note the movement within civil society organizations towards greater transparency, good internal governance for the CSOs themselves. That's a very big thing to do. because when they are credible, they are better positioned to affect the accountability of public institutions. But I'll say something else which will be controversial. I don't know how to put it, which I have seen in my travels, which is that the opportunity to accuse the CSOs for a lack of accountability and a lack of internal governance is almost becoming a pretext for the failure of government or the refusal of government to be accountable. And I think the language of mutual accountability is important. You hear it a lot, but it shouldn't take away from the fact that just within the framework of democracy, there is accountability of government to citizens, which has no preconditions for whether a citizen group is practicing accountability or not. I don't know if I'm pushing the limits here, because the rights, if you have a rights-based understanding of citizens engaging with public institutions, regardless of their failures, government has to be accountable to citizens. But when we help citizens and their organizations to have strong accountability in themselves, it helps their cause.
That's a fascinating point, actually, I think well put. So this, I think, is a great question that really sort of gets to the issue of getting real. How does one create citizen monitoring mechanisms for projects that are sustainable? After all, citizens have other things to do with their time, which is, I think, totally a well-taken point. So how do you create mechanisms that really work for people who also have to feed their families, get their children to school, and heaven knows what else everyone does in their lives under all sorts of circumstances? Who would like to start with that question?
I'm happy to have a go if you'd like.
Yeah, Danny, go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I think the first point to start is to drop or get rid of the log frames and the projects, because I think my experience tells me that part of what goes on is that development actors, whether it's the bank or NGOs, start with a project and a theory of change, and they turn up to citizens and say, hey, we'd really like you to engage with you on monitoring this or that, and then as soon as the project's finished, they're out of there. Whereas I think the fundamental starting point is to start again with the principle of what matters to a community, what matters to a citizen, what are they interested in, and how can we all, if we're interested in development, start with their issues and their perspectives. And that comes back to why this issue has that potential to be a game changer for development, because it inverts that process and power relationship. We're finding it in a project that we're doing called the Big Development Data Shift. The datashift.org. And the idea is we started with a naive assumption that we could somehow try to create a shadow monitoring mechanism for the new Sustainable Development Goals. And we still want to, but we learned very, very quickly that there aren't many people on the planet who are actually interested in the SDGs, but they are interested in children's rights, or they're interested in gender equality, they're interested in environmental sustainability. And so what we're learning as we're trying to shift the power of data back to citizens is that you have to start with the people first and not with your project.
Yeah, exactly. Development is something that is done with and not done to. So any other thoughts on this, like how to make that work?
Yeah, jumping in and building off of what Danny said, I think we need to stop looking at citizen engagement as being these ad hoc, temporary, one-off processes, and really think about how we begin to embed and sustain citizen engagement as a new way of doing governance. And so if we begin to think about how we build our civic infrastructures, take advantage of our civic assets, and create multiple channels for citizens to engage in the work of governance, then we can begin to solve better address some of these challenges and barriers to engagement for individuals.
Other panelists want to weigh in on that question?
No, I just really agree with what others have said. And obviously people will want to give feedback, for example, to the school that their kids go to, or the kids may want to give feedback of the school they go to, because that's in their interest. But they're less likely to be interested in giving some broad feedback to how's the World Bank doing in my country? How should they care? So I think it will be really sort of, as long as you're building on things that people really feel ownership of and affects their everyday life, and you do it in a way that is not too heavy and not too too bureaucratic, I'm sure it can be done.
Well, and then the other thing is to make sure something actually changes in response to the feedback. So,
Yes,
Jeff?
Yes, I was going to add that good development practitioners show an understanding of the incentives for citizen or community participation. And that goes to investing in understanding communities, understanding their agricultural and other cycles, and putting in place processes that recognize where they are during the year and whether or not it's really about opportunity cost, to lessen the opportunity cost of participation through properly designed measures. I think that another aspect is what Satu was saying here, to do with citizens knowing that what they're saying matters. And especially for researchers in development, the idea of going to gather data, it's become almost like a profession. You gather data and write academic theses and papers. And sometimes the people from whom we have harvested data don't know what has happened to it. And I think there are very important principles to follow. Data belongs to the people. It belongs to the citizens. And data is intended to benefit the citizens. It's for their use. And whoever we are as researchers and so forth, we are incidental to that, because the data is supposed to be for, and when we work in such a way that we can complete that cycle and let communities know how our data gathering processes have changed their lives, or are supposed to change their lives, then we increase the incentive for participation. Next time we go, they'll be much more ready to engage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to ask sort of one more question of the panel, which I think is a sort of a great one. How can I, as an engaged citizen, contribute to this process? What can I do? What's the thing I can do? We can say, sign up for the MOOC. That's a great thing. I'll sign up for the MOOC. But what can I do? Whoever wants to start. Well, we don't have to be very formal.
We're supposed to think on our feet. This is just regular rank-and-file citizens and what they can do.
That's this questioner says, yeah. How can I, as an engaged citizen, contribute to this process?
I think about that question a lot myself. And sometimes I think, well, I work at the World Bank, and a lot of my work is around social accountability, socially driven accountability mechanisms. I talk a lot about participation. In my local community, I have never visited my local government, my municipality. And I think that what I can do is to start thinking, how can I affect my locality? Because this is what we ask people when we go out there for development. We invite them to be participants. And so what people can do is to understand their local environment, what's going on, what petitions are being put forward, those surveys that come. I think if we all took a poll that says how many surveys do we really respond to, we would be very embarrassed among ourselves, including surveys from within the bank. So let's take surveys seriously, because when a survey comes, whether from the president's office, I'm putting a plug there, or elsewhere, and we let it pass, we are refusing to participate, something that we're telling others to do. So let's take advantage of opportunities to give input, and let us go out in our localities and be participants in local development.
Go to you next, and then Satu, and then Dani.
If you're an engaged citizen, that's great. You're already contributing to the process. Listen, there are no shortage of problems that need to be addressed, whether we're thinking internationally, nationally, at our local level, or even in our neighborhood or community level. So I think by being engaged, being aware of those problems, engaging with others, talking to your neighbors, giving feedback, participating when opportunities exist, creating other opportunities for participation when those don't exist, those are all great ways to really harness the capacity of individuals to solve some of the most challenging problems we face.
Yeah, I guess the answer depends a lot on where you happen to be a citizen. So your opportunities will be very different based on that. But I think I would say next time you feel the urge to complain about something, do that. But then let the next sentence be, and I am going to talk to so-and-so. I'm going to gather a group of parents from my school and take it up with the school, whatever. Think of what you can do, how you can take this forward, and be persistent.
That's great. That's great. Danny?
Well, two answers. The first is demand more. That's, I think, the heart of active citizenship, whether you want to demand good governance, better public services, demand more from the World Bank, whoever it is, be active and claim your rights, I suppose. But the second answer is perhaps to say to the questioner that actually maybe it's not about what more citizens can do, but coming back to my first point about what more all other development actors need to do to engage those citizens, to listen, to take into account and give feedback to those people. So, citizen engagement, again, is not necessarily about, I don't think we live in a world where people don't have concerns, but people don't want to exercise their rights as much. It's just that those who have power, those who have resources, often ignore them. And that's what citizen engagement can help us change.
That's terrific. I would say, sort of thinking about it for my own self, a lot of it is about picking the issues that are deep in your heart, and that's part of what makes it sustainable. What is meaningful to you, and I think it's terrific that institutions are opening up. It's also frightening that civil society space is shrinking. I commend the people on this panel and the bank for what they're willing to do, but I think all of us need to step up as advocates in the broader community for these topics. I want to thank the panel and invite Maninder Gill to join me up front for some closing remarks. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. This has truly been an exciting event that really lived up to its expectations. Quite rapid fire. In 80 minutes, we got so many insights, messages, tips, and suggestions on the way forward. It's been really extremely useful and exciting. Lindsay did a great job in moderating and keeping the agenda moving. So thanks a lot to you, Lindsay. Thanks to panelists, and then Jim, Sanjay, and Mario set the stage very nicely. I just have 2-3 things to add to what was said, or maybe they are more of reflections on what was said. One, the point that Danny made on this being, the core of this being empowerment, which is, we all believe in that and we practice that and we try to foster that. In addition to that, there is also a very strong efficiency argument. Our twin goals are to be accomplished with limited resources in a very short span of time. So this really helps move things along faster, quicker, and better. And there's a huge efficiency and improvement in quality of service argument. Just to look at the private sector, they don't believe so much compared to us in empowerment voice, the kinds of things we do, but the amount of feedback they generate to constantly do things better, faster, cheaper is unbelievable. And somehow, if we are development professionals, we need to approach at least a part of that with the same perspective. The second point was something that Jeff said. We need to make it really simple for those who participate. Participation is not without costs. It implies behavior change. I'm one of those who rarely takes a survey. I don't answer surveys. Even when I'm not satisfied with the service, I weigh the cost of my own time, the opportunity cost, and getting a marginal improvement in services, and I opt for the former. I don't really complain much. However, imagine you are in a village. It needs to be really simple for you to quickly register in ways that resonate with you, that you don't have to take halfway off from your farm, half a day off, to go and complain somewhere. That is not citizen responsive, citizen engagement. And we go to so many projects, and I was involved in designing some of those mechanisms, which look great when you are in the PMU, and they give you a nice PowerPoint presentation. Then you go to the field, and people have very little idea of where to go, what to say, what will happen if I do. So simplicity is one. important theme we need to keep in mind. Second was the point that Mario mentioned. If I'm part of the government, I need to really believe it works for me. And it's not enough to say, okay, times have changed, buddy, you wake up. This is not, it's not going to turn back. You have to now stand up and be accounted for. I think there needs to be an incentive for service providers, for government officials to engage citizens, and we need to work for them. So it's not about finger pointing, ascribing blame. It's more about, everyone has professional pride, everyone wants to do better. How can I see it as something that helps me do my work better? So that's and the third is like more of a dream that I've had for many, many, many years, which is that we can all say we have arrived in this agenda the day when our folks working on governance, not on social accountability, not on citizen engagement, not on any of the participatory stuff, but folks working on public sector reform, budget reform, enterprise reform, if they can make this a core of the reform process, if they go to an elected entity or to a state government and say, here are the 6 things you need to do, and in them is an absolutely non-optional way to engage citizens. Until that happens, we would still be, we will make great progress, we'll do great things, we will talk about them, and we will continuously keep improving them marginally. But I think until this gets into the core of the governance agenda, this is not going to make the big impact that we are all talking about here. And I think we are very close to that, given the fact that Mario was here, and this is led by the governance practice today, which gives me tremendous hope and faith that this agenda is about to arrive. I think it hasn't arrived, and as citizens who demand accountability and believe in that, we should not rest until that happens. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I want to thank everybody in the room and online for your attention and engagement with this process. I'm sure feedback would be welcomed on it. Thank you so much for being with us, and I encourage everyone to go sign up for the MOOC.